After Dark. Welcome to the new format of Ask Lovecraft After Dark, brought to you by Stage 10. As I mentioned a little while back, YouTube and Google were getting rid of their Hangouts on Air, which is how I recorded all my other interviews. So now we are doing it like this, and I hope it's not terrible. But to make sure that it couldn't be terrible, I have on tonight an amazing writer, a fantastic editor, and a good friend, Wendy Wagner. Wendy, welcome.
Leland, thank you for having me.
Wendy and I met in Portland. Now, were you at CthulhuCon or did we meet at the film festival?
I was at CthulhuCon, so I think
Okay,
that's where we met the first time.
okay. But I definitely hung out
But
with you and saw you do like author reading stuff at
yeah,
at the film festival,
yeah.
which is a very fun time. Anyone who is in the Portland area or out west or just needs to get to Portland should go to the film festival because it's a lot of fun. And the Callahans have been incredibly kind to me over the years, and we've had them on the show. Get out there; it's good times. Because now for you, it's a short commute because you're actually right there, aren't you?
Right, yeah. I just live here in one of Portland's little suburbs, and it's such a treat to go to the festival every year. Well, I've missed a couple, but it's just terrific.
And you're native to Oregon as well, right?
Yeah. There were the shameful 5 years where my family lived in Washington after I was born, but they swiftly rectified that, and
Oh,
so
good. Okay.
you know,
That's good.
since
That's
then I have not left the noble land of Oregon.
fantastic. Now, Wendy, you have a novel that's been out for about a year now. Is that correct? Oath of Dogs.
Yeah,
Tell
yeah.
us about
It's
this.
a
Yeah.
sci-fi eco thriller, I guess is what they call it.
Ooh.
And it's basically about a fairly near future. Humanity has its first ever colony outside our solar system, and it's on a planet which, if you've ever been to the Pacific Northwest, may remind you of the Pacific Northwest in that it rains all the frickin' time. And the main character is a lady who has some agoraphobia that's triggered by seeing the sky. So she thinks it's going to be a pretty swell place to live if there's always cloud cover because she's afraid of stars. So she and her friendly mental health companion dog, Hattie. They go off to this world, everything's going to be hunky and or dory. But when they arrive, they find that the guy who hired her uh, has vanished into the woods since she's been in space transit. And everybody's like, "Whoa, it's a wild and dangerous place. These things happen." And she's like, "I think this is weird. Maybe I'll poke around a little." And there are strange people that live here because, frontiers are full of oddballs, and there are lots of people who have reasons for not liking dogs very much, and there's a lot of really cool native flora and fauna that are interesting and maybe a little creepy. And yeah, it was a really fun project to work on, and yeah, I think it's a fun read.
There's a fair amount of dangerous fungus in this book, isn't there?
Yes, yes, there is a lot of dangerous fungus. So I kind of modeled basically all the plant type life off of like what was around when the dinosaurs were on our planet. So there's, like giant ferns and giant horsetail type plants that are grown to like tree size, and there's just tons of weird kinds of fungus and strange bugs and things like that.
Okay. Do you have any of those like cow-sized beetles, or did you limit yourself a little bit?
The biggest critters that you really run into are they're like isopods. So if you ever found like a roly poly bug underneath like a rock or something like that, but they're the size of sheep, and they like come in vibrant and delightful colors. Things in this world are very colorful.
Now, when you were thinking about this novel, were you really thinking more of sort of exploring a setting that you had in mind, or did you have characters that you wanted to kind of see and put them in sort of a strange situation, or was it like I have a mystery and well, why set a mystery in a parlor room in England when I can set it in space?
Well, So my background, like what I studied when I was in college, is philosophy. So my brain tends to be really drawn to issues that are philosophical, especially about problems of the mind and problems of language. Um, and I read a book, uh, a fairly middling book for Dan Simmons. It's called A Winter's Haunting. And in it, it has a lot of evil dogs in it. And there's a lot of talk in the book about like people's relationship with dogs. And I got to thinking a lot about how, nowadays, especially in this country, most people are used to dogs being, our friendly companions. If they're not a pet, then maybe they're a working dog who's like sniffing for bombs or something, or otherwise being heroic. But in many places, dogs are, if they're not working dogs, they're often pests. Even in the Bible, they talk about how, people, if they died in certain towns, would just be eaten by the dogs out in the streets, and that's a real issue in other parts of the world. And so I started thinking a lot about dogs, and I had a certain idea in mind to explore about uh, kind of like different ways that we tell stories and things like that. And so I wanted to come up with a situation where weird things could happen, and then I just sort of wound up running with that idea and taking it in a science fictional bent.
That's very
Because
cool.
that's just something that my brain does sometimes.
Now, do you think sort of, story by story, or do you have like, oh, this is the setting that I'm going to set 18, sci-fi novels in for the rest of my life?
I am definitely more of a story by story kind of gal. I actually did have some ideas that continued exploring this world, but they did not sell, so I have not written them. And I don't know if I ever will, because now I'm like newly entranced with new, fun, exciting ideas, right?
Well, one thing I loved about this setting is that it was, this planet that they're on is actually a moon over, a larger planet, and you've got Woden as sort of the main planet, and then Moomin and Hugin as the two sort of moons. And that being the mythology nerd that I am, I very much picked up on that and went, ooh, hoo, hoo.
Yay! Well, I thought it would be fun if our own solar system is named for the Roman gods, and so it's like, well, if we had a different solar system to live in, what other mythologies would we get into? And so my brain immediately went to the Norse gods, and probably because a little bit influenced by previous work. My two books before this one were Viking inspired for the Pathfinder line. But
Yes.
yeah, so some Viking lore was kicking around in my brain. Also, like my kid brother, I say kid, but he's like 30 years old because, we're old. He's like a huge, like, history nerd, and like his center of study is like, the history of Norway or something like that. And we were playing uh, in our Call of Cthulhu campaign, we were talking about like we were taking these trips to Iceland and stuff. So Scandinavia was just on my brain when I was working on this novel.
Fair enough. I do want to talk about the Pathfinder setting and the Pathfinder novels that you've done, because for a lot of nerds that I know, that's kind of the dream to be able to like not just like write fantasy novels, but write fantasy novels in those particular settings. I've had friends who have told me their giant Forgotten Realms epic campaign that they're going to make a
Ah,
novel out of, and I mean, and
yeah.
I used to read those garbage novels like Spellfire and Curse of the Azure Bonds. I mean, like I love them
Yes.
so much.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So talk about this. You mentioned you played Call of Cthulhu. Were you a Pathfinder player? Were you like a D&D
I
player that went over to Pathfinder, or
I
was this just a
totally
gig?
wasn't. I'd never played any role playing games because I grew up in this extremely small community, right? Um, there were like, I was the only kid in my class. And my sister, who was terrific, had actually somehow she'd gotten a copy of like the red box of D&D, and she left it with us when she moved out. Cause she's even older than I am, and so we had this amazing thing, but I didn't have anybody to play it with. And I would flip through the book and I would look at it and I would think, oh, this is so cool. I even tried to like come up with my own ways to play kind of like little games using jacks of all things because I didn't have any dice.
Sure.
And right,
That's essentially a
usually you've got
four-sider. I mean, if you get like out some white out and put a little one, a little two, like you can make that work.
and then of course I found the Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman novels that were D&D tie-in novels, and I
Oh,
thought
the
they were
Dragonlance.
so cool. Yeah, the Dragonlance
The,
series.
where
They
where
were
you can
like
literally see
so
the like
great.
initiative order in the narrative.
Right. Because I think they started out, I think, just like transcribing the game they were playing. um and so like as a like 11-year-old, I was like, whoa, I want to be. And it was really exciting. I assumed they were two women because I didn't know at that time that men could be named Tracy. It was like, I want to be these ladies when I grow up and write these exciting books where you get to like totally stomp around and murder people. It's so great and exciting. And so then fast forward, I'm like a grown up, and I'd written some short fiction that had been published, and I saw that Wizards of the Coast had a call for that they were looking for tie-in writers, and they said you send a submission package to them. So I sent one off, and in the meantime, some friends of mine, we for a couple of years were running a blog about like mostly short fiction publishing, and one of them somehow knew James Sutter, who at the time was an editor at Pathfinder, and he in fact was promoting his new Pathfinder novel that was going to come out. And he wrote a post on our blog about it. And I didn't really know James, except, I'd seen him be funny and enjoyable on the internet. We were kind of like, we followed each other on Twitter. And afterwards, I was like, oh, I loved your post on the Ink Punks blog. And I think it's so cool that you're a tie-in writer. And I actually just like submitted like a submissions package to Wizards of the Coast because I always wanted to be a tie-in writer. And he was like, well, have you ever considered Pathfinder? And I was like, I don't know what Pathfinder is, but I could easily. I see that it has, like swords and stuff, so sure. And so he said, well, send me a submissions package. So I sent him a couple of stories I'd written, and he was like, these are great. Pitch me some ideas. And back at that time, Pathfinder was publishing like fiction online, like short stories, like serialized. And so I wrote him a short story about this character, and she was a single mom who had been a pirate who had come to realize that that is no way to raise a child, and so that she was like going to try to be like like go straight, just like do some trading and stuff like that. And they had an adventure that involved goblins and bears and monsters and stuff.
Like you
And
do.
as one does, and it was pretty fun because to get to write this story, they sent me. They're like, we will send you whatever information you need. Like, so I got all these ebooks about Valarian. I had to like start reading the rules, which sort of I was like, I don't understand anything about how magic works.
But did you have to send out emails being like, dear, to whom it may concern, what is an Otiug? Why are bugbears?
So yeah, so that's why in my first novel there's no magic at all. They don't even have health potions because I was like, I do not understand. We're just gonna kill things with swords. Actually,
As someone who runs D&D games, that's my like stance as well. Like, can we just not have magic, guys? Can I not have to like worry about you turning my dungeon to like flesh or something? Can you just
right.
hit things?
But then, so like I wrote the short story, and then we had such a good time writing together that he said, "Oh, I want you to write me a book." So that took some time. And while I was working on the book, my brother, who loves RPGs, he's like, "I can't believe you're working for an RPG company, and you've never played an RPG." So he brought over like some Pathfinder stuff, and we played the Pathfinder campaign, and I was like, things are making more sense.
I mean,
Oh,
Pathfinder is a pretty heady thing to start off with. Like, I mean, I like Pathfinder, but like its whole genesis was okay. third edition was very popular, but now Dungeons and Dragons wants to do something more simple. But there's still people who really like the complexity of third edition. What if we just leaned into that and made it even more complex and more fiddly and have like
Right.
18 like thousand more rules? Like, that's the deep end.
Right. And I gotta say, like, our families, so, like, I've only role played with my brother, my husband, and my daughter, who I think when she started, she was probably maybe 9 when we first started playing, 9 or 10. So we kind of like
That's prime stabbing
played,
age.
yeah, totally. She was very stabby little rogue when we played Pathfinder. uh, we've always played sort of a rules light, more focused on imagination and having fun and goofing around, really. Um, and in fact, then after we got to a point where we're like, hey, we're not sure if Pathfinder is for us because, as you may have noticed, I am a giant Cthulhu nerd. So then we tried Call of Cthulhu and we played for a couple of years. We Everybody but my husband like had their turn like being in charge and like coming up with their own little campaign, and I gotta say that was terrific and we had so much fun. We tried Mouse Guard, but it was not for us. But we did have a great time making paper Mouse Guard figures just like to play with. So that was great. And then, so my husband, he just put his foot down. He's like, I hate role playing. I just hate it. I only like he only likes board games.
Oh, I see.
So we
Okay.
haven't, we've only, we haven't role played in like a year now. And we're all getting like, so do you think like we could just go off for a couple hours and role play without you?
I mean, there is middle ground. There are sort of role playing board games. I've just started a Gloomhaven game right now, which
Yeah,
is essentially as like complex and time consuming as a
right?
role playing game, but you're literally just knocking down doors and killing monsters and taking their stuff and then moving on to the next thing. So,
Right. Yeah, we've been playing Gloomhaven with my brother-in-law, so
oh, great, yeah.
it's pretty fun. I really enjoy some of the elements of it.
I am a sticker for putting stickers on a map.
Oh
Did I
my
say I'm
gosh,
a sticker?
isn't
I'm a
that the
sucker for
most
stickers.
fun?
Did I say sticker for
Yeah.
stickers? Anyway,
I
sucker for
think you
stickers.
maybe meant stick. At first, I thought you said stickler, but I
I'm
like
a,
the
I'm a
sticker for
stickler for
stickers.
stickers. You've got to put it on 13J right where they say.
Have you, speaking of stickers for board games, have you played like any of the legacy games, like Pandemic Legacy?
Yes. So we started a Pandemic Legacy game, and one of the good things about living in a small college town is you're surrounded by nerds and nerds
Mm.
with free time because you're in the middle of rural Ohio. So we were able to like play through like the first like six
Wow.
sessions or so. But the other problem with living in a small college town is people go away because they don't get their like
Oh
position renewed. So we
no.
lost one of our like main four,
Oh
and
no.
we're like, do we just carry on with the three of us, or do we try to like bring someone in and be like, hey guys, you're gonna play this game, but a lot of stuff has happened. We got to explain to you what a barricade is and why we've not been very good
Right.
about establishing them. Um, so
Oh
so that's
no.
been on pause for a while. And then a friend of mine got Seafall, and we started
Oh,
that, which is also like it was a game designed to be a legacy because there's like the Risk Legacy and the Pandemic Legacy, where it's like a
yeah.
standard board game that's legacyized, and now there's games
Right.
that are like legacy, like designed to be a legacy, from the get
Right.
go.
Yeah.
A bit, Gloomhaven is legacy esque in that you've got boxes you're
Right.
opening and stickers, but I mean, it's not. I feel like people can jump in and out of that. Um,
Right. It's nice that way.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
we're still yeah, I think we're still on October. We've been
Oh,
playing sort of a
okay.
year and a half.
We were cheating. We were letting the researcher do a lot more than he was supposed to, and so we were like, "Oh
Gotcha.
wow, this is really easy. We're really blowing through." And then we were like, "Oh no, now we have no budget because we were winning too easily, and
Yep.
we haven't put barricades where they're supposed to go."
Oh, man. Yeah, that
Yeah.
researcher, it's easy to misplay the researcher. We've done it. We did it several times because we keep arguing like, no, this is how you play it. No, this is not how you play it. And then finally we just came. We're like, this harder way is the right way, people. And it was depressing. There was some mourning involved, but we're we're, we're moving along.
Um, my friends mostly got annoyed at me for naming the various characters, like
Huh?
like a Metal Gear Solid character. So I think I had like the dispatcher called Paper Crane and things like that. They're like, Lehman, you
Yes,
can't stop it. You can't do
that
it.
is awesome. That no, that's brilliant. I'm glad you did it.
Now you talk about how you're more into the Lovecraft world, and you did to my knowledge began to put a little Lovecraft into this Pathfinder. I mean, Pathfinder has some space set aside. It's got the various cults to like
Right,
great old ones and whatnot. I mean, it's a game that has literally the Jabberwock in like their monster manual. So I mean,
right.
these they're a bunch of nerds. Uh,
Yeah.
so how was that? How was that sort of like? Was that you being like, "Hey guys, I want to put some Lovecraft in," or did you sort of like try to hide it on the down low?
Well, Pathfinder was coming out with a new product that was promoting more like some more fresh takes on some Lovecraftian play, and so I'd been trying to pitch a second novel for a little while, and my editor actually came up with this Lovecraftian idea,
Oh, okay.
and he said, "What do you think about this?" And I was like, "Well, of course, tentacles are my jam." So sure, yeah. So the first book was much more like I had an idea, and the Pathfinder team helped me massage it into like a format that worked for Pathfinder. Whereas the second book was really more like a commission where they wound up having an idea and I just kind of built it to suit them. So there's a lot less of me in there, except I feel like the last chapter is like probably 100% Wendy Wagner.
Yeah, very nice. The two works of yours that I have enjoyed appear in
Wow.
Swords of Cthulhu and She Walks in Shadows. Those are Ordo Victotum, Vir Totem. I probably wrote that down incorrectly. And Queen of New America. And Queen of New America, I think, was the first story that I was really introduced to because you read a big chunk of it at, I think, the H.P.
Oh,
Lovecraft Film Festival, right?
yeah, yeah, I did. I kind of forgot that I read some of that there. It's a good story to read, I think.
And yeah, no, those are both incredibly fun, and those are some fantastic anthologies that
Oh my
y'all at home
gosh, so
should
good.
should pick up. Have you been in that sort of the Lovecraftian fiction sort of world for a while, or how did you kind of jump into that strange mess?
Let's see, what was my first Lovecraftian publication? I'm not even sure anymore. I've been in a lot of anthologies that were like Lovecraftian. Like Ross Lockhart's
I see Curvature of
Cthulhu
the
Twist
Witch House in
Talking.
Innsmouth magazine. I got your bibliography up. This is
Oh,
how I.
that was probably the first one.
Okay,
Was in back when Sylvia Moreno Garcia was editing Innsmouth magazine.
yeah.
She that was my first breakout like Lovecraftian story, and that is still I think my absolute favorite Lovecraftian story that I've written. It is really good for reading out loud. And yeah, so I started with that. I've had some things in the Lovecraft easing. I actually this year was just in this book, The Secret Guide to Fighting Elder Gods.
Ooh.
Okay, you probably can't even see that.
Nope,
Oh,
nope. I
there
see
you
it. It's
go.
very nice, very
It's
swanky.
got Shauna McGuire and Jonathan Mayberry in it, which is pretty exciting. So it's actually like a YA Lovecraft collection. Yeah, just a lot of different things, and of course, uh, on top of like I have the one Pathfinder novel. It's bad when you have to look at the poster on the wall for your book to remember its name, isn't it? A Star Spawn is very Lovecraftian, but I also had a short story in one of it was a story about the Gug, and that was really really fun to write, and that's in I don't know so it was like the adventure journals or something like that. So a couple of Lovecraftian things for Pathfinder, but yeah, just over the years I just keep going back to the master.
Now, did you start off like did you get into Lovecraft through Lovecraft himself, or did you find other writers kind of playing in that milieu that eventually sort of led you kind of back to the beginning, or how did you get into that?
Well, I actually knew nothing about Lovecraft until I was got into writing. I'd seen the flyers for the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival when it started, but I had no idea what it was about. And when I started writing, I was really focused on fantasy. I didn't think I could write science fiction. And one day I picked up an anthology at the library, which I think was Northern Frights. It was a compilation from a long running small press like magazine up in Canada. I was going to guess from the name. And at the time, I didn't really like short fiction. And yeah, I tore through this anthology and I was like, I love short horror stories. These are the most fun to read. Oh my gosh. So then I was like, I'm going to learn how to write these. And so for a couple of years, that was really like my focus. I'd like look up like anthologies that had calls for submission and I'd try to write something for them and inevitably get shot down. And eventually I finally like made some headway. But as part of this process, I started reading like who are like, I was looking up like, who are the most important horror writers and things like that. And of course, people kept saying Lovecraft. So I got an anthology, well, not an anthology, I got a collection. Um, it's the Lovecraft collection that Carol Joyce Oates edited.
Oh, okay.
And I just like tore through it. And it was, I think it's called like Shadows and Wordsmith or something, ultra basic. I can't remember, but and it has like a lot of the really like it's like the greatest hits of Lovecraft basically. You've got the rats in the walls and the outsider and I don't think Shadow Vernsmith is even in that one
Oh,
actually, but it's
okay.
got like the Dunmouth horror and so it's probably not called that. But at any rate, it had Call of Cthulhu and it was like so great and it was really eye opening to me because I really enjoy a lot of like that 19th century flavor of things like Sherlock and all that stuff. And so, and I always liked Poe. And so it just was immediately appealing to me to have this like weird adventures. It's like the kind of monsters that I liked, and often not necessarily focusing on like a really physically powerful hero, but like somebody who's kind of a hapless nerd was often the hero, and it just I enjoyed it so much, and it was just so fun as well. You've got tentacles and madness, and like the set pieces are just like perfect for me, like these gothic houses and all kinds of goodness, and so I was immediately like smitten. And then I realized that I'd like seen Lovecraft's footprints, I mean fingerprints on so much stuff, and of course I hadn't known it. There are so many things that I like. I've always been a big fan of Stephen King, and obviously he was a big fan of Lovecraft, and he was a really big influence on Stephen King. And so, anyway, that's kind of like what got me into the madness.
Fantastic. No, I mean, it's so I'm so fascinated by people's journeys into the weird world of Lovecraftiana and the folks who, are very popular and do very big in it, but aren't actually themselves, big fans of him or his work.
Right.
Versus the folks who like, no, I've been reading him since I was 13-year-old, and I was at my uncle's cabin and I found a yellowed dog-eared page, of some paperback from the 70s.
I wish that had happened to me. Also, I kind of wish it had been like cursed or something, so like I had a third eye on my back that looked through time or something. But that would probably itch.
Well, I
So
mean, it's so funny how like the taste evolves, right? I didn't grow up as a Lovecraft fan, and if I was still defined by what I was reading in my teens, it would be just Pratchett and Evelyn Waugh. I don't know what that Venn diagram sort of would create. Um, Ask Evelyn Waugh would be a very fun, very different show. I'll tell you that.
that would be extremely different.
Just a lot of gay Catholicism mostly. But I mean, what's fascinating also is to see how you sort of swap hats between being writer and writing short stories and getting published in all these works and collections. But you also are an editor yourself. You work for both Lightspeed and Nightmare, which are fairly like you're two different briefs there. Tell us about that. I really loved you talked about how you do your own sort of like writing in the morning, and then you sort of put on your administrator editor hat in the afternoon. Is that just so you make sure your wires aren't getting crossed, or do you allow a little cross contamination?
Uh, Mostly it when I first started working at the magazines, I found it was very easy to let them eat up my entire life because it's really easy to publishing is always having little fires to put out all the time. There's always something going wrong. Writers turn in things late, or they don't turn in things, or they turn in things, but then their email, they're like, oh my gosh, that was the corrupted file. Or, I mean, there's just always something. Always. So, in general, I'd say 3 out of 4 weeks of the month, if I check my email at any point in time, there will be something for Lightspeed and Nightmare for me to take care of. And if I did not protect my writing time, then I would just be sucked into this wormhole of taking care of disasters at the magazines. So that's one of the reasons why I'm very much okay, in the morning we write, in the afternoon we edit. And, there are some slower times. This is we are just coming out of a nice slow time, getting into the busy season of the monthly cycle of work. So there's usually 4 or 5 days where I can be oh, this afternoon I could maybe also write. Maybe if there are no disasters at home with my daughter or the cats or somebody's doctor's appointment or the dentist or something.
Nothing's on fire.
Nothing is on fire. Type quickly. Yes. But I really enjoy working for the magazines. It's been terrific. The editor of the magazine and publisher is John Joseph Adams, who is he is a super terrific dude. He's super easygoing, and actually I wound up working with him also because of Twitter. I had met through Twitter. I started chatting a lot with a gal her name is Christy Yant, who is now an editor for Tor.com. And at that time, Christy had just become an editorial assistant for JJA. And they were working on an anthology, which she and I, before she became an editorial assistant, she and I had both had short stories accepted to this anthology called The Way of the Wizard. We felt very cool about getting accepted into it because there were very few open slots for these submissions. It's the only time he ever did this, and we got to be published with reprints by Neil Gaiman and George R. R. Martin, and so you're I'm in a book with Neil Gaiman and Ursula K. Le Guin. Oh my God, yeah! So at the time, all of his anthologies had little intros at the top of each story where it would be, something that would prepare you to read it and would be interesting. And she was going to write all of these. Well, she also was very busy with life, and she was a little bit stressed out, and she had a lot of work. And I said, well, if you want, I'd be happy to help. Just teach me what to do. And she's like, well, okay, I'll ask John if that's okay. And he said, go ahead, test out this weirdo. I know she can write at least. And so I wrote a couple of these intros, and then he really liked them. So I became an editorial assistant for a couple of other anthologies, and then he brought me on to help him run. So he had started Lightspeed in 2010, I think. And at that time, Lightspeed was owned by Prime Books, which also owned the magazine Fantasy Magazine. And they said, John, come run this magazine for us. And he said, Wendy, come with me, I need help. So we ran that for about a year, and then Prime said, we don't actually want to publish magazines anymore. Do you want to buy them? So he bought Lightspeed and Fantasy from them, and he wound up rolling them into one delicious, good-tasting science fiction and fantasy smorgasbord just under the name Lightspeed. And then I said, well, I'd gotten hired to do this Pathfinder stuff, so I was like, I'm going to take a little break from editorializing for a while. And I did that, and then a couple of years later, he was like, I need more help, and this time I could pay you. And I said, I'm in! And
the magic words!
Yes, money. So, and by that time he'd started, this horror magazine, and so, and now I take care of both babies. I oversee all the submissions for them. I help work with all the authors on edits. And I also run the nonfiction for both magazines too, which is absolutely a blast, especially at Nightmare, where we have this column that I adore. It's called the H Word, and we bring people on in a new writer every single month, and they just write about like tropes or like how horror works or things like that. And I've gotten to work with like some really cool people from, Paul Tremblay to Lisa Morton to, gosh, we've got Benjamin Percy has an essay coming out in October, and it's just been such a great way to connect with people and really learn more about like the horror genre, and I think it's fabulous and fun.
Can you tell the folks at home about how you keep trying to destroy all these genres in your various women destroy horror, queers destroy fantasy? Just explain to people why you're on this just hell bent destructive bent.
Well, for three, we had it started in 2000. The idea started in about 2013. There have been a lot of weird things going on in genre and some other magazines, and like in the Sifwood Bulletin, there were some vaguely sexist like essays from old timers in the field,
I am shocked,
and
shocked to find sexism and problematic behavior in genre literature.
and there was like um, this nonfiction essay in a different magazine that was talking about science fiction that's not really science fiction, and it said that Lois Bujold McMasterson novels were not really science fiction because they had so many balls in them, where they talked about what people wore, and
Those are the best parts of those books.
right.
The livery. I live for her description of livery and like the various, like epaulettes.
Nothing is better than a good description of an epaulette, right?
Right?
It's so good. And so Christy Yant, she was on Twitter and she said something about, oh yes, women, they're always trying to destroy the science fiction with their stupid discussions of clothing and stuff. And, people got into it, women are just out to destroy science fiction. And then JJA, who by this time, Christy is no longer helping him on magazines. Now they're married and they're running a publishing empire together. He's like, you should do a special issue of Lightspeed, and it should be about how women are destroying science fiction. Like, it's like a comedic approach to, like, talk about, what women have done in science fiction and bring in some special, like, an all women issue. So in 2014, we kickstarted this program, and first it was, we were just going to try and make enough money to do this special double issue of Lightspeed. But then, like, people kept throwing money at us, and we were like, what do we do? And we were like, what if we expanded this to fantasy and horror, and we got other people to edit these things, and it would be fun? And we were like, yes, this is great. Immediately thus taking like 10 points of sanity damage, uh,
It happens. This is
because you're,
don't do
I
things.
mean,
That's the first lesson. Never do things.
never do anything and you will stay much more sane. And I mean, it was amazing. Women Destroy Science Fiction was just such a massive, amazing collaborative effort. I think at the end there were like over 160 women involved, between like people who sent in personal essays, people who had critical essays, people who had short stories, there was flash fiction, there were all these volunteers. I mean, it was enormous. It was wonderful. I got to be in charge of the nonfiction in that, and it was a blast. And then, we had Ellen Datlow come in, and we did Women Destroy Horror, and somebody really great edited Women Destroy Fantasy. I can't think of who it was, but she was amazing.
There's a lot of destroying going
And
on. That's what's important.
there's so much destroying. And then we're like, well, this this was so cool, and people were clamoring like, you should do more of these things. There are more people who deserve to be recognized who haven't had a chance to like really showcase their work. So then we were like, okay, I guess we're going with this. So then we did a feature on the LGBTQ community, and that was Queer as Destroy, science fiction and horror and fantasy. And then we had people of color destroy. And then we were like, this is literally shaving years off of Wendy's life. Because, I mean, my main job on top of like all the regular editorial stuff is I'm also the managing editor. So my job is to boss people around and make sure they turn things in, get things done, and there were just so many people to boss around. It was just like it was like a nightmare.
Turns out who
So
was really being destroyed was
it was me.
you.
It was me. And so luckily we had tricked our friends who run Uncanny Magazine, the Thomases. We tricked them into thinking that this was a super fun project and would not harm them in any way. And we said, you should keep this ball rolling. It's going to be great. So they have been like doing. They did 1 year for science fiction, and I think this next year they're doing fantasy for uh, disabilities. And I think it's gonna be great. I don't know if they'll put. I'm assuming they'll put together a horror issue because I think their magazine still handles some horror things. So my fingers are crossed because obviously horror is the best genre. But anyway, so they've been doing great work continuing the project.
That's a lot, Wendy. You're
It
busy.
was. I try to keep myself busy because otherwise I just get into trouble.
Oh, fair. Well, speaking of trouble, what can folks look forward to in the next little while? Are you hitting the con scenes, or are you mostly just staying buried away?
Um. Well, I spent a lot of the summer doing a lot of teaching stuff. So I get a tiny break. I'll be at our local science fiction and fantasy convention, Oricon. I'm going to HP Lovecraft this year, not to do any author events, but just to enjoy, sit back, connect with people, watch some freaking movies. And then for anybody who's a writer in the audience and thinking of maybe honing their craft, I'll be next summer at the Cascade Writers Workshop, which I went to this year. I led a little critique group and did some classes, and it was fantastic. It's just a super great community that's like just all about encouraging people to improve their craft, and it's really supportive and great. So if you are looking for that, you should check out the Cascade Writers organization. So those are
Fantastic.
some things that are on my agenda.
And where can folks find you online? What's the best place for them to go?
They can go to winnywoohoo.com.
I love that website so much, Wendy. You have no idea.
Oh, thank you, Lehman.
All right. And you're on Twitter as well, I believe?
Yeah, WN Wagner.
Fantastic. Well, Wendy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so much for
Oh,
being the guinea pig as we explore new formats. I'm sorry you
yay!
I'm sorry you've spent this entire time with a giant logo on your head. That's just the way it's going to be. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And thanks to
It's
everyone in the
better
crowd.
my head than your head.
Oh, we do have a question. Going back to Vikings.
Oh,
How did you read and did you enjoy Journey to the West?
I have not heard of this
Okay.
magical
We
volume.
had a we
Let
had
me
a
see.
question back. I assume it's about Vikings. I don't know, but it was back when we were
I
discussing
would think
Vikings
so.
and dogs. So,
An enormous inspiration to me was actually Michael Crichton's Ears of the Dead,
oh,
which is
okay.
a favorite book of mine from back when I was a kid. And obviously, I may have seen the film adaptation, 8 or 9 times. Not just because Antonio Banderas has muscles. No, it's just a great movie. But that was a big inspiration.
Very nice. Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone for watching. This has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark. It is the sister program to Ask Lovecraft, where I dress up and pretend to be H.P. Lovecraft for questionable reasons 3 times a week. Yeah, if you want to be part of these live conversations, like the folks in the audience, you can go to Facebook and join the Ask Lovecraft Appreciation Society. We have a lot of fun. We're very attractive, well put together people, and that's sometimes you just need a nice, sane corner of the internet where you can just be dapper and pretend like you're on an airline back in the '60s and enjoy your martini and your cigarette. Uh, if folks want to just follow me screaming into the void, you can follow me at Twitter at Lehman Kessler. If you want to watch episodes of Ask Lovecraft, you can go to asklovecraft.com. If you want to find out about live shows, I'm going to be heading off to the hinterlands of Cleveland to do a show in October. So if you want to see me live and you want to get close to Cleveland, you can find me there. You can find out there are more live shows at lehmankessler.com. If you love what you see and you want to keep us on the air, you can go to patreon.com/asklovecraft. We always appreciate it. Thank you once again for watching. Wendy, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we're going to have you back on to hear more about your exciting adventures.
Thanks.
All right, everyone. Have a fantastic night. Bye.